This is my mini jungle aquarium.
And in here live a group of blue dream shrimp.
The tank itself was made back in January and I used a lot of scrap materials to make the entire tank for free.
Now I love this tank and I think there's a lot of potential here. But the combination of the floating plants and all of the leaf litter made this a very dark setup, which isn't ideal for preserving these dark blue shrimp. So, what do you think? Yeah, I think so too.
For this new tank I want to reuse most of the old materials, so I began by taking it down and being very careful I get every last shrimp out safely. While building their new tank I'll be keeping them in this bucket.
Now on this footage it looks like we don't have a lot of shrimp, but trust me, there's a lot of them in there and we'll count them later in the video.
First I'm going to clean the old hardscape materials. I moved the empty tank outside and gave it a good rinse with some water. I then started ripping out pieces. These were attached with expanding foam. I could remove the bulk of the foam by hand and the rest was removed with a wire brush drill bit.
And after leaving it to dry overnight, we're now left with clean pieces of hardscape we can use for a new setup. Now there's one thing I would like to add to that. Most of these materials have been in 4 setups already and are about to go into their 5th. And as you can expect, time is starting to take its toll on these pieces. The wood is starting to become quite brittle and these rocks are not as good looking as they used to be. Nonetheless, I do plan on using most of these pieces again in this new setup. But I'm gonna add some new stuff into the mix. I got 2 of these really cool pieces of spiderwood. For now they're a bit of a different color than the old pieces, but over time they will slowly start to match. And I also went out and got myself a few new pieces of dragon rock. This stuff is way more yellow than the old stuff. The old stuff has almost become a grayish color. I didn't really know this stuff would discolor this much over time, but if you put the pieces next to each other you can again see that there's quite a big difference in color.
Anyway, let's get the tank. I decided to upgrade the shrimp from their old 25-liter aquarium and give them this 54-liter tank. It won't get filled up all the way, so I'd say the usable volume will be close to 45 liters. This is still a huge upgrade and even more so when you consider their old tank wasn't filled up all the way either. I already added a foam mat underneath the tank and painted the back black so we can get started right away. I also already cut a piece of acrylic to size to help distribute the weight of the rocks.
And for this aquarium I think it will be easiest to design the hardscape outside the tank. So I got the piece of acrylic back out and I'm gonna use this as a base to place all of my rocks and figure out what I want to create.
Designing the hardscape for your tank is kind of like making a puzzle. If you try hard enough you can make any 2 pieces fit together, but they won't always look good. To get something that really looks good you have to pay close attention to the materials. These dragon rocks have a clear direction and it helps to keep them all oriented the same way. As for the spiderwood, I want it to look like the roots of a plant up above that's desperately trying to hold on. So I'm looking for bends that match up with the sides of these rocks. What we've made so far looks good, but it's very unstable. So before we continue, let's lock all the pieces together. To do so, I'm squeezing in a small piece of paper towel between the connection points and then covering it in super glue. I go around the hardscape making sure all the pieces are connected at multiple points. The main structure is now completely locked together, but it's still not done. I really want the spiderwood to feel like roots wrapping around the rock, so I'm using the old branches and look for places where they can naturally wrap around the rocks. Once I'm happy with these, I go back and lock all of these in place as well.
At this point I'm done building, but the structure isn't done yet. You can see that the connection points are still visible all over the place and are kind of ugly. So what we're gonna do is cover all of the connections with more super glue and then cover them with a little bit of dragon rock dust to hide all of the connections.
Once I hit all the glue marks, it was time to put the structure in the tank and break off one of the branches. I had to make some adjustments to make the broken piece fit back in there, and after that I began adding the aqua soil. This has been used before, so to make sure the plants get all the nutrients they need, I also sprinkled in some root taps and some new aqua soil. Next I'm adding in some play sand. This stuff is super cheap and I have a ton of it. The only downside is that it has a slight grayish color, which isn't what I'm looking for. So on top of the play sand, I'm also adding in a decorative sand. Now I could have skipped the play sand altogether and just added in decorative sand, but I didn't have enough on hand and I want to save some money for a big project that's coming up.
So far I'm really happy with how this tank is turning out, but let's bring it to life with some plants.
I'm starting by tying the two biggest plants to the hardscape with some fishing line. And I covered their roots in some rehydrated sphagnum moss, which will help me add more plants, like this cryptanthus. After that I added 2 small cuttings of rabbit's foot fern. And I was going to add this Fittonia, but ended up deciding it felt a bit out of place. But one plant that was an absolute must was the Hemagrophis rapanda. I took a few cuttings from a frog tank and placed them behind the cryptanthus. This plant is really hard to come by here in the Netherlands, so I want to propagate it as much as possible. And after all those big plants, it's time to add some moss. I'm adding in small bits of Java moss all throughout the sphagnum moss. This will need some time to adjust, but should eventually completely cover the sphagnum moss. I then moved the tank to its stand and began working on the water portion. I added a couple more rocks and some really small bits of dragon rock to ease the transition to the sand. I don't know about you, but when I see all these roots, I say Anubias are a must in this setup. And I pepper them all throughout the hardscape. For the background, I'm imagining a forest of Rotala. Unfortunately, I only have super short stems of immersed growth on hand. But you'll see in a bit that they waste no time and start growing right away. A combination of Cryptocoryne Wenti Brown and Wenti Green will fill out the mid-ground, and then I added the water. Along the waterline I added stems of Hydrocotyle. This plant will gladly grow and spread out along the water surface, almost acting like a sort of floating plant. Moving back underwater, I'm adding some Zoetwassertang as a final touch. At this point, the tank is done, and since we've reused old aqua soil and play sand, the tank already has a nice base of beneficial bacteria. This means we can add the inhabitants.
I do want to add that although this will probably be fine, I would have preferred to wait a little longer before adding livestock, especially since we're adding shrimp. Now, my shrimp are currently in a bucket, waiting to be added to this tank. The bucket has no beneficial bacteria at all, so I'd say this is probably the best option.
The first inhabitants are some assassin snails. Now it's time for the shrimp. In the old tank we had a few color mutations showing up, and I don't really mind the different colors that much, but I prefer it if this tank only includes the blue shrimp. So I started sorting out all the shrimp. I put the blue ones in this container and all the others in the fishbowl. And after sorting, I let the blue shrimp drip acclimate to the tank.
And while we wait for the shrimp to drip acclimate, we can start counting how many we got. About a year ago, I added 12 blue dream shrimp to the old tank and they reproduced a lot since then. I'd say they have at least tripled in numbers. But the catch is, not all of the babies are blue. And we sorted out all the non-blue babies, and now, right here, we're only gonna count the blue ones. So my best guess is that there are about 35 shrimp in there now. But we're gonna count them. But before we start counting, I wanna know your best guess down in the comments. Let's go. $42, and I think that's about it. Yeah, we got all of them. We got 42 shrimp in that tank. That's quite an improvement. That's really nice. Now let's release them.
2 weeks later, everyone settled in nicely and the plants began growing. You can see that the Rotala isn't wasting any time and is popping out new leaves right away. And the same is true for the Hydrocotyle. That's very cool and all, but the tank still looks very new. None of the plants look the way they should, but give it 6 months to a year and this thing will be absolutely wild. By that time, I'll definitely update you guys. Now, I did envision this tank as a shrimp only setup, but looking at it now, I feel it will look much better with some small fish. I'm thinking of maybe adding a school of Kubota rasbora, but I want to know what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments, and if you're hungry for more content, I recommend you watch this video next to see me build a tank for my peacock gudgeons. I'll see ya there.